Okay, so really, really great to have you on, Dave, and just to introduce yourself to the audience, I guess, in terms of who you are and what you do, and what fun you're having now on Cloudy with a Chance of Dyslexia. Thanks for joining us,
Mm-hmm.
but be great just for you
Pleasure.
to just introduce yourself initially.
Sure. Hi, John. Thanks for inviting me on. It's a pleasure. Unusual to be on this side of the table, and I'm hopefully going to enjoy it. So my name's Dave. I've worked in tech for my entire career. The first 25 years or so of my career, I was always on the customer side and generally doing some form of tech-driven transformation, which obviously during the eras of technology over the last 25 odd years has changed in its style a little bit, but generally with the same ethos, which is how do you make businesses better and humans better through technology. And then on the in the last 3 or 4 years, no, actually no, probably actually last 5 or 6 years now, I've been on the advisory side of the world, and I'm currently at Capgemini as Chief Cloud Evangelist.
Fantastic. No, that's great to know. And throughout your career, you've been involved in some huge projects and like complex cloud transformation. So, can you share any particular project that stands out for maybe some of the challenges, but the value it brought to the business?
Yeah, the one that was a real linchpin in my career, I think, and the one that I was building up to on the customer side was I initiated and ran the BP Cloud Transformation Program, which ultimately ended up also having workplace transformation and network transformation all pulled into one very significant endeavor called Digital Foundations. And that program ran ultimately for about a 5-year period, something along those lines. And for me personally, it was the one that I felt like I'd been working most of my life towards having the skills and the ability to actually be able to make the case initially for something like a cloud transformation and then ultimately execute on that cloud transformation in some way, shape, or form. Um, it was hugely challenging. It was hugely challenging because at the time that we went into doing that piece of work, it was very, very early days for cloud. We're probably talking 10 or 12 years ago now when we initially started to do that piece of work. I think the iPhone 4 had just come out when I was originally started to think about how to help a large organization go on a transformation journey like that.
Wow, the iPhone 4. Yeah.
The iPhone 4, those were the days. I still miss the iPhone 4. The upside of it, though, and we can maybe delve into it a little bit more as the questioning goes on, but the general upside of it was predicated on cost saving at the time. So it was predicated on a data center exit, high volume, at high speed, given the sheer scale of the organization. And then when it got to the other side, it would have eliminated a number of underlying risks with service life, completely refreshed a lot of the up to operating system level of the estate, and then set up a platform for future innovation for the organization, um, much of which came to pass. Like many organizations, the transition to cloud and how much it costs during and then after transition continued to be a challenge. It's not straightforward, and it requires new capabilities to be built to manage cost in a different way. Um, but in terms of building a platform for the future, I mean, uh, you know, a few years after that platform was established, we hit things like the pandemic, and that platform provided opportunities for that organization to sail through practically untouched in terms of productivity and its knowledge worker workforce and all of those sorts of things where we're immediately still productive.
Mission accomplished then, Dave. That's great to hear. And then and again, the fact that that was the very early days of cloud, and I imagine the challenges of trying to explain that to leadership, at the time must have been an interesting
Oh yeah,
conversation, getting that across.
it was hard. It was indeed hard, and we were. I mean, the organisation I was working in then, it, it's a very engineering culture. It's a very innovative organisation, so it's generally open to that conversation. But you still have to go through like many cycles of education on not just the technology. To a certain extent, as it always is in technology projects, the technology itself is often the more straightforward bit or the more easily learnable or teachable bit. The more complex bit is the impacts that it has, the risks that it brings along. And in the case of cloud, the changes to things like the financial framework and kind of how the P&L of IT ends up looking as a result of shifting from, capital expenditure to OPEX and all the various considerations that needs to go into that. I was very lucky at the time because I had a couple of senior sponsors that very quickly understood the positives of doing something like that and were very supportive as we went through the many months actually of making the argument, refining the argument, making the argument again till a point till we had it to a point where we could actually start to execute.
So the leadership style at the time, Dave, when you look at the styles of management, I guess Waterfall would have been like, I suppose, part of that process, and was it just developing into changing to a more of an agile approach to business at the time, or was it a transition, or was it still very Waterfall in terms of management style, or were you seeing a transition at that stage?
Yes. So where were we? Predominantly, we were in a world of
Right.
Waterfall at that point, and that was both in terms of how we were operating as an IT organization, but more challengingly, because the IT organization was pretty receptive to wanting to do things in a new way quite quickly. But more challengingly was that the macro governance of the organization also worked in a waterfall style way. So if you want to try and implement a change program that was highly visible, like this one was, and had a lot of investment attached to it, then that's going to be visible at the top level of the organization, and quite rightly so. So the challenge was, how do you take a change program that has a huge impact and make the case to deliver that in a new style way that doesn't necessarily fit the governance framework of the organization. That was the fundamental challenge, and I articulate that now in a way that he's 30 words about how we need to do that, but actually it took us probably a couple of quarters to even conceptualize that was the problem we had to solve. So we were constantly discovering new things, refining what we thought, moving on another step, taking two steps back, refining what we thought. And where we ended up going with it won't surprise probably people to hear, was we ended up with sort of some sort of agile construct at the top of the organization, where within certain gates, for the main governance process, within those gates we would operate in an agile style way. And that was the beginning, I think, of us really thinking about what leading in an agile way looks and feels like. People get very wrapped up in methodological concerns when it comes to things like agile and waterfall, but actually, like many things in what we'll talk about today, at the heart of all of these things are human beings perspective on things, human beings perspective on leadership, styles of leadership, all of those sorts of things. When you're talking about transformation at that scale and that profound a transformation, you've got to dig into that, and that goes from the individual, so the individual leader's learning journey, all the way through then to how at organizational level that makes change.
So on to the question of change. You've held a lot of leadership roles in your career, and with various tech companies. So how does your approach to that strategy? Because I will say, for the people that might listen to this that don't understand what waterfall is and don't understand what agile is, I might even do a little sub-note session, maybe explaining that as well in the podcast. But in terms of how you approach the strategy and innovation to evolve over time, especially in the context of very much cloud and digital transformation, how's that changed for you?
Yeah.
In terms of the strategy. And I guess that's very much maybe the Waterfall style. But what would you say has been how it's evolved and how that transition has happened for you?
So I'll tell you a bit of a story that happened. I've told this a couple of times. This story. So if any of your listeners have heard this before, I apologize for repeating myself. But it was the moment of it was a light bulb moment that you have a handful of times in your career. If you're lucky, you have a moment where you get a realization. Either you personally make it, or a coach helps you with it, or something like that, where you suddenly realize you have to do something in a really very different way, and actually that opens up a whole new universe of thinking and approaches that you perhaps hadn't had before. And mine happened on the program we're talking about. And about a year into the program, my leadership and I were sat in a room. We were working our way through what is not uncommon when you're managing a big portfolio of complex programs. You don't have enough money, you don't have enough time, and you've got far too many requests on what you want to do as a team to actually square the circle of all of that. And we were exploring multiple different ways that we might go about solving some of the logjam problem that we had in the program. And that meeting was getting a little tense. We were surrounded at the time by some complex politics. We had a lot of people asking questions of the program, all completely valid. And as it does in a situation like that, when you don't have a clear way forward, or at least a clear next step forward, tensions arise within the team. And it's how you manage those tensions and keep everybody facing forward and walking forward, even though you've got a huge amount of uncertainty or difficulty. Anyway, we weren't being productive in this meeting. We weren't finding a way forward, and it was getting difficult. Yeah, so we were having this conversation, and I happened to have my coach in the room, and it was my coach, but also we were leveraging my coach right across the team, and he would do one-to-ones with different members of the team. Then he'd sit in and kind of watch us as a group, and it was all about development of the performance of the team. And anyway, so we were in this borderline argument, and I turned to Alistair, the coach, and I said, Alistair, look, we ain't making any headway here. Have you got any advice? And what he said was, it looks like you're looking for a complicated solution to a complex problem. And I was like, well, that sounded good, but what does that mean? And what he was referring to was an absolutely excellent piece of work called the Cynefin framework, which was kind of invented and then developed by Dave Snowden and various people that he works with. And if you go online, you can find information on it at the Cynefin Co. website. So have a look at that. And it's Cynefin spelled in the Welsh way, which is Cynefin. And the Cynefin framework effectively talks about 4 states of the world, like in a 2x2. So bottom left would be like the world of order, very well understood, very clear, very repeatable. Mm-hmm. So if you do steps 1 through 5, you can repeat steps 1 through 5 and get a pretty consistent answer. And then top right is complicated. And complicated is effectively the world of Waterfall. There is a load of known unknowns, and there's a lot of understood risk mitigation for those unknown unknowns. That means that the planning horizon can go out quite far. So you can do a 3-year plan, or you can create a plan to build a building. It's still a very difficult endeavor and can be very, very costly and very disruptive. But actually, humans have done it now for hundreds of years, and we know what we're doing. So therefore, the planning horizon is clear. What happens in that sort of world is people get locked into that direction. It becomes unresponsive to change and unresponsive to changing environments. And then if you switch on to the left-hand side of the 2x2, bottom left would be chaos. So chaos is obviously every minute the situation changes, decisions just have to get made with incomplete information, almost everything is an unknown, but you just have to keep moving forward, and eventually things will clarify. So, the world going into COVID is a very good example of chaos
Yeah.
management. And then finally, top left is the world of complexity, and complexity is dealing with a world where there are unknown unknowns, but recognizing that and tailoring your leadership and the way that you respond to those things and respond to market conditions accordingly. So instead of planning for 3 years, you might plan for 6 months or 3 months. You might test something in the market, see how the market responds to it, and then respond to that. So Amazon, for example, when they are releasing new stuff onto their platform, it's fairly well talked about example. Amazon do hundreds of releases a
Mhm.
day, and that is true. But actually, they don't leave all of those releases out all of the time. So sometimes they put releases out, they test the market response to that release, and then pull it back in and refine it. So Prime, for example, was a series of refined tests that ultimately got to the product that you would recognize as Prime
Mhm.
right now. But you're dealing with a very difficult way where sometimes you don't know what the answer is going to be. So what Alistair was suggesting when he said you're looking for a complicated solution to a complex problem is that in the program that we had at the time, there was such a high level of unknowns. We were breaking new ground in almost every single direction. And therefore, how do you expect to plan in the way that you would have on a project that you really knew how to do? So we had to then change how we reported. We had to change how we ran those sessions. We had to bring our horizon right in terms of kind of making promises until we then got into a rhythm of how do you lead in this new way. So that to me is like probably one of the more profound kind of moments in my career when I actually lots of things in that conversation then slipped into place in terms of a digital organization versus a legacy organization, and how does it, a change enabled organization or a very responsive organization versus an unresponsive organization? What are the things that are going on underneath that? And actually, if you use Kinefin as a framing vehicle for that, it's pretty insightful.
No, I'll make sure that I include that in the notes down below when we release this. But
Mm.
one of the interesting things that you said was that that level of complexity in management. How do
Mhm.
you mentally cope with that? And that's really like yourself. How did you like look after your own? This is a bit of an aside, really, but how did you cope with that period? Did
Mm.
you
Mm.
did you go and meditate, or did you like just have a beer after work? Was that the answer at the time? I was just interested to know. Maybe that was the answer because it was a very much a period. But how did you mentally cope with that at the time?
Oh, that's a good question. And actually, as I get older, and hopefully more experienced, that you can't always say that that's the case. Older certainly. I pay much more attention to that actually on a personal
Yeah,
level, and actually become much more mindful of it. I can't say I was the same at the time we were going through this. That I was maybe emerging into that space, but I was still subject to my own anxiety around it. So I I did self medicate a bit through having
yeah,
beers with friends and talking things through, and you know
yeah.
having a moan and all of those good things. And I wasn't yet there enough to actually recognize what was going on with me at the time. And in hindsight, I can now look back and describe these things to you. But as I was going through them, there was actually much more intuition and some aspects of courage, maybe some aspects of naivety, which I think you also need going into these things, that ultimately get you through it. Um, it probably wasn't the most mentally healthy time in my life, um, but I lent on coaches and talked some of those things through. And you know now as I am 7 or 8 years later from the end of that process, I deal with these things very differently now, and think much more. What's the right word? I'm much more I'm a sort of much more preemptive and aware of the response that I'm likely to have, whether that's like my kind of underlying uncontrolled psychological response or whether it's like a intentional response, and try to be a bit more measured about those things and also keep some distance from them.
Yeah.
And actually, at the heart of your question also, I think, was an interesting thing, which is when you're in the world of complicated, and everyone's in the world of complicated, and everybody's following the 3-year plan, or everybody knows that they want to hit X% plus or minus 0.5% by the end of the year. Everyone gets on that track and everyone's in the same swim lane. However, when you're doing something that is constructively disrupting that, that requires quite a lot of personal courage, because the way you end up reporting it and the way you end up talking about it with people might be so different to what they've only ever experienced as what made them successful before, that they almost immediately start to reject it as an idea because it doesn't feel as professional or whatever it might be. So going into these big change programs now, I think it's not only kind of how do you look after yourself, but it's actually spending the time to help people to understand it. So rather than trying to sell concepts to people, it's actually much more like just helping them to understand different ways of doing things sometimes.
So this leads on nicely, really. I've sort of looked at some of the questions that we talked about before, but one of the things probably leads on to
Mm-hmm.
how do you see the role of cloud technology in business transformation, and particularly in terms of agility, scalability, and innovation, and I suppose to lean on that as things speed up, you know, and you've mentioned coaching quite a bit, yeah. And I think it's more accessible to people now than ever before, and probably there's more places to find that coaching. Is and that's probably a side question, but would you say to a young leader coming through, go and get a coach? Would you say that that's a really highly recommended thing to do? From what you've said, it seems like
Mm.
businesses will buy coaching at some phase in leadership growth, but they don't necessarily tell you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's just quite a big question there, really, because we've talked about cloud. Yeah,
a
it's a
lot in
lot
it,
in that one.
a
So
lot in that.
so yeah, so it's probably a two-part
Well, let me
question.
let me take the coaching. Let me take them in reverse order,
Yeah.
maybe, and start with the end and talk about coaching, and then I'll talk about cloud and business change. On coaching, I think almost universally yes. So I see the development of yourself personally, and that might what has been said, what gets called sometimes soft skills, which sort of almost demeans it
Mm.
sometimes. Like you've got these hard or technical skills over here, which are all about your profession and what you do. Soft skills are actually much more about how you do things, and they're equally important, and sometimes they're more important. And actually, it's much easier to train hard skills than it is soft skills, because a lot of it comes from the sort of person you are, the sort of human that you are. So the more aware you can become about how you build that set of skills in tandem with the sort of the hard skill professional person you want to be, the more effective you will be. It's just as simple as that. And even though we talk about tech all of the time, you talk to anybody sensible in the world of tech or tech change, they will always refer to the human in the middle of the technology. The humans still, just about until we have the rise of the robots in the next 10 years, but at the moment, humans are still at the center of the conversation. They're still the ones that make the decisions. They're still the ones that block things, and they're still the ones that bounce off the surface of things if it doesn't go very well and get injured in whatever way. So coaches, to me, help you build that side of yourself. It helps build your resilience, helps build your understandings of other humans and how organizations, humans come together to create organizations. You forget that sometimes when you're joining organizations, but actually it's just a big network of
Yeah.
like-minded and directed humans. And so therefore within that, you need to be able to operate. So yes, leaders who are coming through who aspire to levels of leadership where they want to change direction or drive direction and have ideas and implement ideas, the how of it is just every bit as important as the what, and like I said, more important in some cases. So yeah, I personally, you might be one of these people that's just a genius that pops out knowing all of this. For me, it's been a
Yeah,
journey,
I'm one of those
like,
people.
and it continues to be. And yeah, I always thought so, John. I mean, you're thinking, God, this sounds like a lot of wasted time. Just crack on. But yeah, no. The real reason is most of us learn skill. So you look at a leader who is like really polished and really good at what they do, and you're like, God, they really show up well. Most of that has been taught or communicated to them. A few have it intuitively, but not everybody. So yeah, the more help you can get, I'll take as much help as I can
Yeah.
catch on. That's
Even
the
some of
bottom
the
line.
great leaders, you look back at Bill Gates' early videos and when he was first presenting, or anybody who's run a huge organization, they've got so much more polished through the years, haven't they? Just from
Oh,
the
for sure.
guidance they've had, and I think that's they've obviously been coached in terms of that approach and how to speak. And yeah, so sorry. Yeah,
No,
carry on
no question.
the other parts of the question that I threw at you. So
Yeah, yeah. I think I'm on part 3 of a 9-part question, so I'll get through it. The next bit. I think you were asking about cloud and how cloud can help change businesses and such like, and the impact cloud has on businesses. So I've worked in organizations pre-cloud and post-cloud, and I hold cloud. And one of the reasons I jumped into doing it more fully as a profession as being a very significant change agent in how businesses can operate. It isn't just another, kind of small iteration of technology. It can be profoundly different to do it properly. And the way that I hold it is there's been really 3 eras of major compute. Started with the mainframe back in the 60s through to sort of the early 80s. And, if you think about what happened with mainframe, organizations structure themselves around their compute. So if you want to get an answer from the computer for a certain thing, you would have to go down, trot down into the basement or something like that, where you would have a huge air conditioned computer room and people in white coats. And then you would have to work on punch cards to get the computer to operate and then to give you an answer. And the round trip journey on that, might be, I don't know, might be a number of days before you get an answer to that. So it's not what's happening there is you're not really transforming how an organization operates with it. You're speeding certain aspects of it up. You may be doing computation that might have taken whole teams. Now you're doing it with, kind of with one computer operation, but it's still taking a period of time. So organizations go along, centralized compute, work in a certain way, not radically changed. Then you have client server, and within that, the internet era coming along. And client server democratized technology. So you would then have computers on desks, computers at home. And what that did to organizations and the software that came along with that, it allowed organizations to then start to join up. The much derided spreadsheet has had a profoundly transformational effect on how organizations work. And that goes all the way through to things like ERP technologies, which allowed organizations to globalize. So, along with the internet and client server and associated technologies, the world globalized as a result of that type of compute. Organizations started to make themselves more efficient. They started to use, those awful, I can't think of the awful, thing where you ring up and you get automated telephony responses and all of that kind of stuff. But got laughably dumb in some ways, but still allowed sort of efficiencies to be found and different ways of doing things, and it was an interesting period. And organizations within that period fundamentally changed shape. What cloud compute brings along is a way to work much faster. So within the client server era, you had your own data centers, or even if you had outsourced your data centers, there would still be like a lead time on equipment or whatever that might be. All of that lead time on things, and all of the message passing between the different departments in those structures sought to create a certain tick speed for an organization. It matured over three or four generations of outsourcing. So by the time we got to the end of the client server period, it was a very well understood way of operating, and Waterfall fit into that really well. Just to bring that back into the conversation for a second. But if you wanted within that era of compute to move faster, to implement faster, to be more responsive to your market, you would have struggled because of how that technology functioned and how the supply chains of that technology function. In the world of cloud, all of that goes away. So any anchoring, slowing down effect that you used to have in the world of client server with democratized technology now changes. It's still hyper democratized. Anybody can do it. And there's no lead times. You can pop stuff up straight away. That means that enables then complex ways of working, to use the Kneffin word, or agile ways of working, because the technology is legitimately no longer a barrier. The lead times are no longer a barrier. And the innovation speed of the technology itself is at a rate that you can barely keep up with. So there's always new stuff there to exploit. So in my mind, then, when you look at the effect of cloud on businesses, and people refer to things like cloud native businesses or digital transformation, what you're really talking about is moving from a way of working that was dominated by client server technology and lead times to a way of working now that's much more natural and responsive. But it is fundamentally different. So cloud to me is the harbinger of a third era of compute that's small a agile, is highly responsive, and has got an extremely quickly innovating tech stack. And of course, within that tech stack, we've had things like big data, and we've had data lakes and different ways of thinking about how to harness data in an organization. And now, of course, we're getting into things like large language models and generative AI, which are now creating wholly more immersive and natural ways to access that data. So what's likely to happen is that even though we're sort of like 10 years or so into the cloud era, I think we're going to see the next 5 years of being like deeply more transformative.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna, that's an area that I've spent the last year really looking at, and sort of little bit to an aside question on that is, with those transformations, you see there's quite a few interviews with Bill Gates going on, and like he's talking about his shock in terms of how good it is in terms of OpenAI.
Yeah.
Where do you see that going in terms of, how would you advise businesses to take a strategic view of that? Now, I know this is a little bit off topic, but if you look at the impact of something, a tool, they are tools, and they are the new machine. The way I look at it is they're the new machine, and people will look back on what we're doing now as almost a cave painting time, in probably 10 years, you know.
That's perhaps true. That's probably true,
Yeah.
actually.
So
Yeah.
you know, with your strategic sort of mindset, and sort of trying to get operational excellence working as well as a cloud evangelist, how would you proceed with having that conversation with clients today, or having more of a coaching conversation with a friend or a customer about how they'd implement something like AI? Because I think you don't have a choice now. I think you have to. You have to build it into your strategy. It's like, it's not a choice anymore. But yeah, thoughts on that?
So the way a lot of people used to think about strategy is you're almost trying to predict the future and then create like a plan to get to that notion of the future. And in a very well understood, less complex world, for a period of time, that was possible. And just so I don't come off as horrifically naive, at some level, that is also still possible today. You can still set strategy and direction a good period out and head towards it. However, I think the number of moving parts, the amount of pivots and course changes you'll make between now and getting to that North Star are now in my mind part of the process. So strategy is an iterative
Hmm.
process. You shouldn't be afraid of changing direction or pivoting when something in the environment has changed, and don't be blind to that and push through as if nothing's happened. So strategy making itself, I think, in the modern world is a really different skill than it was even perhaps 10 years ago, certainly 15 years ago. With AI, yes, it's a no-brainer. I mean, you'll have AI enabled companies and you'll have uncompetitive companies. I think that's the way everybody's
Hmm.
saying it. Now, I'm not making an argument here about whether AI is right or wrong. I think that's a whole other podcast,
Yeah,
or certainly another question. But let's assume for now that it just is, and let's assume that it's at minimum a tool that is going to make organizations incredibly more efficient from a human perspective. What you can definitely say is that it's going to have an absolutely transformative effect to a level that is actually hard to predict right now. But what the way I've started to think about it with customers and just generally is that there are two ways you can think about implementing it. You can go the efficiency route, or you can go the effectiveness route, and it depends on what you want to try and do. So in an efficiency route, which is actually the predominant mindset of a lot of IT professionals who are long in the tooth like I am, because we've been brought up as IT needing to manage its costs, drive down costs, centralize things, make things more efficient. Your first notion might be about control, or it might be about putting in a platform, or it might be about, you know, some aspect of, kind of getting your arms around it, which is fine. But you may well end up putting something in place that's completely inappropriate for where it actually ends up. And then there's the other route, which is about effectiveness, which is much more about open experimentation. So not the Wild West, but some form of way where you are worried less in these opening years about how you ultimately control. And yes, you might build in some inefficiency into that, and actually might end up costing you a little bit more. But the reality is the upside of it should be higher because you're just experimenting more freely. And I think that's the balance that needs to be struck in the conversation, not only at individual organization level, but actually there's a meta question in that as well about how AI is released into society and the world that needs to get considered. Like all things, either end of that continuum is probably not the place you want to be. You want to be in the middle, judging what you're doing, and don't get in the way of it. Like be on the right side of the change, I think.
yeah. I mean, I read Satya Nadella's actually listened to Satya Nadella's hit refresh. It's really interesting. His story so far
Mm, mm,
around Microsoft, and he used a term that when he was transforming Microsoft, which I think he's done a fantastic job, and you only have to look at the numbers that have come out recently. Yeah,
oh,
right.
absolutely amazing case study, like truly amazing.
Truly transformable. And one of the things he
Yeah,
quoted was, and I thought that's absolutely right, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. He took a quote,
yeah, for
and I
sure.
think he's really led that through what he's done to his people within Microsoft, and it
Yeah,
and as a strategy, the culture that they've driven isn't just written on the walls. They do live it, and they ask those questions time and time again. From the type of business that they were, he's had to make that change, and it appears he's done a great job at it. People will stand up and say, "No, that's wrong. We need to try and do this, or we need to do things differently." Now,
yeah,
fundamentally, you still need
yeah,
operational excellence, and you need the like you said, Dave. The basics need to be in there, but what he suddenly managed to do with OpenAI so quickly and implement that into, and release it, yeah, in a Copilot is incredible. You know, it's like, wow, that's art, and you know, art and vision and culture that's driven that. You know, so it's exciting times. And again, another aside, but you know,
But he focused on but the point you make there about culture and strategy for breakfast is very true. You know, it's a phrase that's been around for a good long while now, but actually people still ignore it.
they do.
And if you don't address fundamentally how an organization thinks and feels about something, you can really forget about fundamentally changing it. You've got to engage with some of the deeper themes of an organization, I think, to really profoundly change it. And that's one of those things it's far easier to say than it is to do.
So Dave, I don't know whether you've come across the term hippo culture, but that's the highest paid person in the
I'm
room.
not sure.
Walks in, you know, and everybody listens to that person, and you know that's sort of a culture that I've come across in my career, and that balance of people feeling when they have a good leader that they can say anything, you know, and feel comfortable in saying that. I think is what
Mm.
Satcher's managed to do. You know, whether it's still, you know, still going to be nervous around Satcher because he's going to be like such a powerful influence over the business. But I think as long as you ask an intelligent question, he'll give you, you know, he'll give you his answer, and in the right growth mindset way. You know, not a question. You've got to consider that all the time now in terms of, you know, continuous education is probably the most important element, I think, in a business like that. It's like having that mindset. I need to learn something every day here. You know, this is moving fast, and I need to continuously learn. So answers like building
I
this little
think,
podcast is great. You know,
no, yeah, not just even within a company like Microsoft. I think just the era we're moving into, and certainly that our kids will inhabit, might mean they have hugely diverse careers. So, like, I think it's already evident. I'm a Gen X
mm-hmm.
person, and before me is like boomers and early Gen Xers. And even some people in my age group have had pretty stable careers. They've gone in to do one job and they've kind of trucked along over that period. Some have been very successful, some have been happy and less successful, but they've done almost the same job for their entire career. I just can't imagine that that's the case anymore. And my job has changed fairly wildly. Like, I started out training as a quantity surveyor of all things and
Wow,
did construction economics, and then pivoted into IT, and then from going from being customer side in IT and being CIO and transformation leader and that kind of thing, now more into the world of consultancy and advisory and helping other organizations move along. And then, yeah, as you say, getting to do things like podcasts is an entirely unpredicted thing, even as of about 5 years ago. So, yeah, I think that fleet of footness and always being ready to continue to learn is not a nice to have anymore. It's like you just got to go into your life with that framing.
yeah, and I mean, I think well, one of my favorite books that I've read recently is Atomic Habits. I don't know whether you've come across it, but it's a great little like.
I haven't. I am still wading my way through an incredibly long book by J.K. Rowling. She does that thing where she writes as Robert Galbraith and writes like a
All
detective
right, okay.
series thing. It's actually a very entertaining series. Sorry, I'm on a
No, no,
tangent
no,
here,
no.
John. But it's a very entertaining series of books. Um, but the new one just got out, 900 odd pages. Oh my god! I've been in the middle of that book for what feels like months at this point. So I haven't read that book you
That's
point
fine.
out, because I'm lost
Now
in the
you
running
sound like you're
grey.
having more fun than I am, I think, on that
I'm
one.
not sure. I'm not
So,
sure.
so what advice then would you offer to professionals
Mm.
aspiring to move into leadership roles in the tech industry, particularly? Yeah. Um, Areas like
Hmm.
cloud
Hmm.
strategy, digital transformation, should they focus on AI? What just advise to young professionals trying to move or just build their careers and build their knowledge. Is there certain things that you'd say, these are the top three things that you really should think about when you're
Yeah,
moving into an IT role,
yeah, and it's different now. in the world of digital and cloud native than it was
Yeah.
previously. So if you look at previous iterations of IT organizations, the way that you moved up is you became more of a manager, less of a technology centric person, and more of a manager. And that could be a manager of people, it could be a manager of suppliers. But it was almost like the more senior you got, the more de-skilled you became in the application of core technology. And that was visible in lots of IT organizations becoming order-taking organizations, splitting from, not really being embedded in the business, um, de-skilling the organization by outsourcing so much of it, that kind of thing. So therefore, as an aspirant leader or an aspirant CIO, there was a fairly clear track that you went on through that. What I think has really very much changed since the advent of cloud is that really understanding your technology and really understanding how you apply that to solve for big problems is part of the job now, all the way to the boardroom. And that's a way of thinking in technology that I completely advocate for. That the tech organizations within larger organizations are the digital brain of the organization. Some of them don't act like that, but that's what they should be. That's what the board wants them to be. So it's about have skills, have as many as you can, go as deep as you want in certain areas, but don't only go in one area. Like really build out your skill set, really understand what's going on. When you're more junior practitioner or engineer, you need to go deep in a particular area, have a thing that everybody knows you for, and be shit hot at it. And then as you start to build out from that, you need to add in other skills like architectural thinking. You need to be able to think about program management. You need to understand how finance impacts technology, which sometimes I know to some deeply technical people can feel like you're selling out a little bit, but actually the reality of the situation is if you want to do big transformation, you really have to understand the financial framework that sits around it and the outcomes from that.
Yeah.
And then as we touched on it in one of the earlier questions, as you're developing that out, you need to be developing out your personal side of things, like what kind of leader do you want to be in a world of supportive leadership? How do you want to show up, and how do you want to help others to be successful? So I would say that going at it from a point of view of, I think a lot of people refer to these things as being T-shaped, which is deep in one area, but then broad enough across a load of other areas. And that's not a bad way to to hold it. It's probably not my preferred model, but it's the one that comes to mind now, is to think about that and be intentional about those things. What it will also take from a personal level is courage. And sometimes courage to do the right thing, and then sometimes courage to say no to things. Like in my career, in my early career, I was dead set on being a chief technology officer. So I turned down like a lot of operational roles in the route to being a CTO at the time, which was great. And I actually was lucky enough to be a CTO of DWP when I was in my early 30s, and I was delighted about it and thoroughly enjoyed it. But what I also realized was I wasn't T-shaped enough. I was like very deep in the world of being a CTO, but I didn't have transformational experience. I had limited operational experience. I didn't have too much apps experience. So what I've spent then is I then spent 10 years building out depth in other areas. So the core thing in all of that, a bit long-winded, but the core thing is with tech today, especially if you're executing it within a non-tech organization or an organization that's looking at you as an IT department, you need to stay technical, stay a practitioner, and even when you're in very senior leadership roles, really know your stuff about how IT can be applied to that business. Now, I focused that very long-winded answer really just on what it's like to be in an IT department. There's obviously a whole other world of a career in tech where you can stay pure engineering, and you can stay entirely pure in the practitioner side of technology. If you go to things like the cloud service providers or systems integrators, where you can make your whole career not trying to move up through management ranks, but actually just being a kind of a distinguished engineer is another way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean the interesting thing you said about that is that dynamic of continuous learning sort of was built into that as well. You said about, it's important that you still learn about the technology and don't just be a manager. Don't fall into that trap of,
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
get there, that you don't realize, I'm a great people manager, but then I don't really understand. So when you're in the room having those conversations, you suddenly really you have to take notes and think, I don't understand this. And did you come across that then when you're sort of thinking, oh God, I need to go off and learn this? And I imagine that's going to happen to anyone, right? So
So yeah, so it happens at different levels. I mean, God, there's a when you were moving fast in an organization, you can be in meetings every day where you don't understand some aspect of it, and learning about how you respond to that and actually manage for that is part and parcel of
yeah,
the
yeah,
journey,
yeah.
really. Um, the what was I going to say? I had something else I was going to say on that. The big aspect of of continuous learning and continuous improvement for me. Give me a minute, John.
Hmm,
You might have to edit
that's
point
fine.
this. I'm trying to get my
No,
thought
no, take your
together.
time.
Just remind me of your question.
Well,
I completely lost my
let
way
me give you
on
this
what you
one
wanted
because
there.
I think this probably help frame it. Yeah, but
Yeah.
say reflecting on your career journey, how would you think the
Hmm.
technologies industry's approach is going to evolve? I would say is probably the real final question in terms of where do you think it's heading?
Hmm.
Because that's where a leader now or a young leader coming up, where do I go? What do I do? How do I do it right? The why, what, when, where sort of thought
Yeah.
process, you know, and it's really trying to help a young technologist really find a way,
Mm.
to enjoy his career because like you said, it's like moving so fast. So and again, it's those elements that you've used to navigate
Yeah.
is really is what we're sort of trying to look to find. That there isn't a secret sauce, right? But are there
Mm.
certain things
Right.
that you'd say that you need to build into who you are to help you along that journey, really?
Yes, there is a couple of things. The first is I saw a little, I think, an Instagram clip of Obama talking about um, not a dissimilar thing. It wasn't exactly the same thing, but it was not a dissimilar thing. And he was reflecting on be the person that gets on with stuff. So instead of being the person that waits around for the big opportunity or the exact right thing, be the person in the room that goes, "Yep, I'll take that. I'll take a run at that," and then go away and then smash it, and then do the same again. Those are the sorts of things that get you noticed. That's going to get you noticed in any type of organization. Is just be the person that can be trusted to get on with stuff, get stuff done, be a self starter, and be collaborative in doing that. The other thing I would add to that, not that I would ever try and add to any of Obama's wisdom, but maybe as an aside to it, um, is just keep an eye on a little internal meter of am I adding value here? And it's dead easy when you're in a big organization in particular to just get caught along in the sort of currents of the process and and just run along and think that if I've got this in my annual plan and if I achieve that in my annual plan, then great. Well, actually, that's not good enough. Like for me, there's so many people who do great in their annual plans, but actually they're never going to change
Mm.
anything. They're not standing out to me as being interesting or a leader or bringing anything new to the party. They're just playing the game or they're just going along, like I said, in the current of how that organization functions. I don't rate that particularly. What I look for are those individuals that have thoughtful opinions, will bring them forward, that will disagree with what's going on, but then commit to the direction we've agreed as an organization. So that internal meter of, am I bringing something here? Like, am I bringing some value? And I think if you're that can-do person and you're constantly metering yourself around having value, almost no matter what the construct around you is doing, you are going to ultimately be demonstrating leadership ability, bringing something to an organization where you're actually helping change that organization or helping that organization progress. And that to me always looks and feels good. Sitting underneath that, you've got all of the other things we talked about, which is continuous learning and being up to speed with what's going on in your industry. And then if you're in the world of technology, which is obviously a very rapid clip. And then finally, the advice of others and having a real listening from the advice of others. Now that can be coaches, but it could also be, the person in the organization who irritates you the most might have something there that you could absorb and find useful and make you more effective.
So you're not going to call that person out on this session today, Dave?
Too many to note in the time available, John.
Yeah. Actually, the sub note of that, I remember. I don't. You probably never watched this, but I read a few books on it in the past. Red Dwarf. When Red Dwarf was trying to select,
Oh yeah, no, I
yeah.
watched Red
So
Dwarf.
when Red Dwarf was trying to select the person that would keep Rimmer alive, or is it Rimmer? It was Rimmer. I'm trying to remember which way I went. Yeah,
Rimmer,
when
yeah,
he wanted,
he was the horror. He was the Chris
yeah.
Barry.
He wanted to keep, he wanted to keep him alive.
Mm.
He selected the person that annoyed him the most, right? Because he knew that would keep him.
Right,
It would
right,
keep
right.
him sane, right? So that's
Oh,
that's the
interesting.
hologram in the beginning. So because if you
Yeah,
think of
yeah.
the person that annoys you the most,
Oh, is that
they
right?
keep you
Right.
sane. They're more likely to keep you sane than somebody that's just your friend. Yeah. So it's strange,
Yeah.
but that the things that raise you,
It also,
help you raise the bar, I'd say sometimes, is that person that's putting the coal on your fire to go, yeah, I need to get that done. I'm gonna that person's driving me in that direction. So
I would also say that having that, everybody has that in there. There's always someone in an organization that you aren't aligned with, or you feel like is in your way a lot, or is your major competitor, or your major, the person who's trying to block the change program you're trying to. There's always those people
yeah,
always exist, and framing them in the way that you've just said um, makes it so much easier to deal with that situation. So it removes it from being a conflict situation into being like a learning situation, and it's a bit pat that, but legitimately the more you can approach those situations in a constructive manner, the more success you're going to have, and the more successful the program you're going to have. Is when I look back, like going full circle on the conversation, when I look back at that change program I was talking about earlier, and I think about the complexities of the stakeholder management and the some of the aggressors that we had in that situation, I would just deal with that sort of profoundly differently now than I did at the time. Where I was probably a bit obtuse and a little bit dismissive, or I would bog something down in governance or whatever it might be. Actually, there are much more constructive ways to deal with that, and instead of thinking about it subjectively as a conflict situation, thinking about it objectively as a learning situation is far healthier. It also much less stressful.
yeah. I sometimes lean to art to answer that question when I say to the kids about it. I say, look, everybody can go to I don't know, modern art or whatever you like, yeah, and look at a
Hmm.
picture and see it completely differently. So, the
Yeah,
perception, your perception might be completely wrong. And unless you take a step back and have a look at that perception and go, actually, maybe I am wrong, and get other people's opinion and collaborate effectively, and understand where you are,
yeah,
you might be right. But sometimes it is, you know, taking that step back and having a look at that everything that's going on. And I say to the kids, look,
very.
you need to do this. You need to take that approach with life. There will be people that you won't ever get on with, but it doesn't mean they won't bring value in a business situation. They might never be your friend,
Yeah,
but they could be valuable to the organization. So don't dismiss that out of hand. So
Yeah.
Look, I think you've been absolutely fantastic guest on the show, so I really do appreciate it. And I know we haven't talked anything about dyslexia. You know, the whole concept wasn't to talk about
Mm.
dyslexia; it was to say that, you know, the nice thing about technology, it's transforming, it's transformative. And so my little mission is that actually people that historically were in the neurodiverse camp, technology is going to transform that
Mm.
enormously in the next, 10
Yeah.
to 20 years. And those people that think like Richard Branson, are going to be more valuable in organizations. So that was the chance of the tiny little bit at the end, really. So it's about how that's going to work. You know.
I couldn't agree more. I think in a world where frankly a lot of the thinking is going to end up getting done for us, and things are going to be automated that haven't been automated before in different sorts of ways. Humans that think differently and bring new perspective that are sometimes completely out of left field is actually where a huge amount of value is going to be driven. And actually, if you get very philosophical about it and think about, well, what is the role of the human in an AI driven society? It's often doing new things and thinking about things in a new way. So you're entirely right, John, that there is nothing stopping anybody to contribute into that situation, and the more diverse that gets, the better.
Yeah, that's great. Great. Look, I mean, it's been really great fun having you on. And look, I'm hoping to have quite a few more of these sessions, and you're always welcome back, Dave, anytime you want. And maybe we'll ask more fun questions next time. But it's to try and share with those young leaders or those young people coming through that, everybody has certain challenges in their career, and how you've talked about how you manage that and you think, I think it's going to help a great deal of people. And I'm hoping that people listen to this and learn something, or at least take a snippet out of it, and it can help them with their careers and potentially their way of thinking. So thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been a real pleasure.